Hey guys, welcome to Health Science Explained. So this week I'm extremely excited to be chatting with Scott Griffiths. So a while ago I saw a TED Talk on YouTube and I was pretty, if you know me, it's something that's pretty far up my alley. So the title of the TED Talk is Muscle Dysmorphia, the Male Eating Disorder. And so while watching this, there was some pretty fascinating things that Scott brought up that I thought really needed to be discussed more, especially in the bodybuilding, fitness, lifter community. And so I'll give a little bit of a background to Scott. But so Scott is a research fellow at the University of Melbourne, and he primarily focuses on eating disorders, body image disorders, muscle dysmorphia, things of that nature. And what really got me interested was the lens that he seems to take, where it doesn't seem to be a lot of research in health is done on your classic diseases, and it's not to take away from that, but I think the mental health side of things focuses a lot on anxiety, depression, things like that. But I think things like body image disorders often go under the radar, and I think being in the bodybuilding and fitness space, it's something that we can't really deny that it's often quite present. So Scott, I guess a good place to start off before we get into a little bit more of your background, but if someone was suffering with muscle dysmorphia, or they were worried about their relationship with food or the relationship with exercise, what would you encourage them to do as a first step to seek treatment?
We're fortunate that in Australia, we have a really effective national eating disorders charity called the Butterfly Foundation. And they run a free helpline. They have a online web chat service, and they are generally just interested in hearing from people who are not sure if they have a problem or if what's going on rises to the level of a disorder. And though they have focused on eating disorders that you might recognize more readily, like anorexia, for most of the time they've been around, they are very across muscle dysmorphia at this point in time. We run trainings with them. If you talk to them about the kinds of concerns that a bodybuilder in the gym 5 to 6 days a week is going to have, they will recognize it and understand it.
Yeah. And I guess one thing to kind of segue from there is, would there be, let's say if a program like that wasn't available, like for example, to give some context, I work in a medical center in New Zealand as a health coach. So I've seen some people who have presented with symptoms of body image disorders, and usually my first port of call is to refer them to the GP. Is that kind of, and I'm not trying to get a critique of my practice here, but I'm more trying to figure out the landscape for someone who's trying to figure out what to do here. Do you think
I've got you.
yeah,
So it is the case that eating disorders and body image disorders for a long time have been among the least well-funded, least well understood psychological disorders out there in Australia and internationally. And what that means is that a general practitioner, even a mental health professional without a specialty qualification in eating disorders, there is a risk that they themselves may not fully understand it or appreciate it. So they may fail to recognize it or to appreciate the severity and to refer onward. Often it operates at best in a kind of whisper referral network where if you know of someone who might know of someone you can refer to who happens to see a lot of clients, that's your best bet. Again, that's where a service like the Butterfly Foundation is helpful because they get calls a lot from people going, oh, either myself or someone that I know has this specific concern. Who can I send them to who will best understand it?
yeah. No, that definitely makes sense, because I think that's one of the things that really confuses me in healthcare sometimes, is I think the referral pathways for nutrition based pathologies aren't often, yeah, they aren't often very clear. Like, it's a dietitian, is it psychologist? And then yeah, I
Yeah.
think it is something that I think we're making a lot of progress, though. I think as we talk about these issues more and figure out pathways, I think there is some solid progress there. And I would love to. I actually should do some
Yeah.
research to see if in New Zealand there's a service like that, because that would be pretty
Yeah.
phenomenal.
The signposting is one of the more challenging things, especially when it comes to psychological sub disciplines, because it is often the case that if you've had 10, 15 years in a career as a health professional, if you're good with a certain type of client, or you've just started out with clients who have a certain type of problem, and you get a reputation for seeing those folks, you then become the go-to person for that. But you don't have a qualification that says that. You just have to know. As an example of this, I know of plenty of general practitioners who are quote unquote my steroid GPs. And if I have someone who's using anabolic steroids, I send them there, not because that person's going to say, oh, here's a prescription for your testing, here you go, but because if you are using and you want someone who's not just going to judge you and be like, you've got to get off this right now before you go and turn into a roid rager,
right?
They can actually help you. They actually know what you're talking about, and that's invaluable. Right? Any of your listeners who have used or considering using, I'm sure would love a health professional who can actually speak the same language as them.
Yeah.
And wanting that to play out in psychology in general is something that I would like, but as you're intimating, it's hard right now. The signposting is not that clear.
Yeah, I think especially when it comes to anabolic steroids, it's one of those things. I'm really, really glad to hear that it does. I think eventually, like someone like yourself working in this space for a long time, you begin to learn, okay, who can give some guidance on this. And I think, yeah, I think those kind of GPs who do understand it, and they realize you can't just say, don't do it, it's bad for you. It's like saying smoking, it's bad for you, just don't do it.
Doesn't amount to much.
Yeah, doesn't really lead to anything. So I'm kind of thinking for you, and let me know if this is too personal of a lens or if there's something personal there. But for you, what sparked your interest in the muscularity orientated eating and body image disorders?
Sure. Well, when I was a teenager, I worked at a cinema, and one of my colleagues was a person who had anorexia. And I remember not understanding it at all at the time, because the solution to her problem seemed so at hand, which was just to eat. And that obviously did not work for her. And in the years around that and subsequent, hanging out with guy friends on trips, etc., going to the beach, I'd hear the same kinds of complaints and worries and anxieties, but packaged differently. And it sounded so similar to her, but it didn't go anywhere. There was no explicit concern being directed their way. They certainly didn't know who to talk to, where to reach out. And then once the more complicating things like anabolic steroids become involved, there's really nothing. As anyone who has used steroids can attest to, there's no formal health professional system or advice there. And it blossomed from there, really, noticing the parallels.
Yeah. And I think that's one thing that's particularly alarming about steroids is it's kind of, it's like most drugs. I feel like the less information, and there's arguments to be made on both sides of if you make them more available and legal or things like that, then does that make it higher likelihood of risk, things like that. But I think in particular with steroids, the safety of using them it's really, really hard to find good information, because as we know, the internet can be misleading when it comes to information at times.
Yeah.
I've done multiple podcasts on steroids, and I found it very difficult to figure out what's actually going on there. I've never done steroids myself, but talked to many people who have. And yeah, I think would you be able to give some kind of background on, I know you've talked a lot about steroid use being on the rise, and why do you think that is? And what do you think are the downsides or risks or factors associated?
Well, the use of anabolic steroids is definitely on the rise in this country, in the United States, the United Kingdom, wherever we've seen what we call an intensification of body image pressures on young boys and young men. We've seen a concomitant rise in anabolic steroids. Part of that has also been the ease with which you can get them. So if you were someone who was reasonably savvy with the internet, cryptocurrencies, dark webs, then you're the right type of person to be able to get access to them. And also, in general, availability in the sense of who is supplying. So a lot of the raw testosterone powders are now coming in from China. There's been a reduction in price point. And where availability meets increased demand, you get quite substantial jumps in the number of people using steroids, which is what we've seen. Triple digit percentage rises.
Yeah. And I think something that's quite alarming for me is one of the things you said in your TED talk was the average, I think you said something like the average needle user is not someone doing hard drugs. They're doing anabolic steroids. And that firstly, is that roughly correct?
Yeah. I've met a lot of anabolic steroid users, as you might imagine, and very often they want to impress upon me that, they're not a drug user. And that's entirely fine. We've done research on the stigma of anabolic steroids, and I understand why people want to distance themselves from that stigmatized identity. The modal, almost common person, if you had to take a pure average on a bunch of characteristics who uses steroids, is late 20s, early 30s, white dude with a professional job or professional aspirations who has, an above average IQ and wants to look after themselves and take care of their body. That's it. It's not a roid raging criminal or someone who's a nightclub bouncer. That's not your typical steroid user. And that's our approach. We're working in that frame. That's our most common person.
And it's pretty interesting because I think these stereotypes are very, very different to the reality. Do you think, I guess one thing that, do you think the sport of bodybuilding ties in much here, or do you think for the majority of the users, it's more of a casual, I guess casual approach would be the word that I would come to, but do you think it's that kind of casual approach, or do you think there is I want to be good at bodybuilding? Or
there is a little bit of, not even a bit, there's quite a lot of cognitive dissonance that comes with asking guys who are in the gym trying to build muscle about the origins of the motivations for doing so. Almost always around appearance or attractiveness and the confidence and the control that comes with that. It often morphs subsequently into something that's more multifaceted, but that's the genesis.
Yeah.
And see a similar thing in anorexia as well. People see images of emaciated young women and men and think to themselves, how can that person possibly have found that attractive? Why did they want that? But they didn't at the start, I promise you. And similarly, when people think of muscle dysmorphia, if the image that comes to mind is the professional bodybuilders who are on really big stacks and they're larger than life, you're talking about the top 0.x percentage of a thing that's this huge pyramid of guys who probably just want to look like, a really fit swimmer. It's a lean aesthetics body as opposed to something that's hypermuscular and larger than life.
I was reading a study recently where they talked about, I think the title of the study is once you start lifting weights, you are forever small or something along the lines. And then it's like a qualitative analysis of different interviews.
Yeah. See, that quote and quotes like it speaks to something that, in our research team, we call the tyranny of progress. And I think people wanting to progress in their life and in themselves and to quote unquote self-actualize is a nice goal and undertaking in and of itself. My worry and a red flag for when bodybuilding and the dieting and everything that goes with it can start to turn from something that's broadly good and positive for you to something that's not working for you is when the means becomes the end. Your entire life now is structured around that progress. And some of the probing questions we'll do to see just how much that's the case is to ask, all right, if you missed a workout today, how bad would you feel about that tomorrow?
Mm.
If you have a bad workout, like if you lift less than what you thought, is it just like bummer next day? Or do you punish yourself for that? Do you look in the mirror and get critical? Do you start wondering, are people going to notice? Are people noticing? Because if you're in that space, it's not actualizing for you anymore. It might have been like that at the start, maybe, but it's not now. Trying to find that balance is something that's much easier to do with someone who has a different perspective than just you and the voice in your own head. Because sometimes that voice is real mean. And that's why services like the Butterfly Foundation can be helpful.
Yeah. And I think it's really just having that effective bouncing thoughts back and forth across each other. I think I see it all the time in my practice where I don't even say much and I just ask someone a question and then they totally solve their own, they figure out their own problem right in front of me. And it's really fantastic to see. And I really think in the fitness, I think it's very, very that illusion of I need more progress, hedonic treadmill, that kind of, I think for a lot of people, it's very, very hard to get off the treadmill. Do you know?
Yeah.
What do you think? Like, I think for a lot of people, it's not pathological. So then they don't see it as entirely, because obviously it's not binary. It's probably more of a spectrum. But do you, like, how do people realize when they're going too far across that spectrum of disordered body image or eating and kind of get off it, I guess?
Well, I suppose there's two questions in there. The first one is recognizing when it's not starting to work anymore. And often, including in the context of dependency and addiction, not implying that this is either of those, you can get a sense for if this treadmill is becoming inescapable by either thinking to the times where you've not been able to work out, you've broken your diet, something's come up that's compelled you to have to change things up, seeing how you felt about that, how you've reacted to yourself. That's a useful way to look into it. As for how you get off of it, sometimes if it's really entrenched, it means the really thoughtful introspection on how you got to this point in the first place. For some people, it can be, a feeling of control. Maybe you feel like your life's a bit directionless, that the gym is the thing that you have sole control over. And as long as you're in that domain and you've got mastery over the inputs, which are all you, your diet, your exercise, your motivation, then everything is going to be fine. And it's like this girder. But that sense of control and being comfortable with uncertainty, that's something that you can address that would release the grip, that tyranny of progress, so that you can get back to enjoying it more. That's the goal there. It could be beliefs like, I just don't think my partner would be as attractive to me. Or I remember when I was skinnier or overweight and I couldn't get a date, and I don't want to go back to that. I don't want to be unlovable, etc. All of that stuff will keep you on the treadmill. Unless you address that, you won't move forward either. There's lots of beliefs that we hold on to, often that have had their genesis in childhood or high school when we were young, and we didn't have much ability to choose our context, where maybe it served us then. Maybe you're in high school and you couldn't get a date, so you went to the gym and got a bit jacked and got confidence. Maybe it actually did help you. But if you're like a 29-year-old guy with a whole life, is it really helping you to bring that belief a decade through your, worldview to now? The answer is often no, but when it's been with you for that long, pretty hard to displace it.
Yeah. I don't want to get too much into my own personal history here, but it's like I've found it for me, it does come down to the fulfillment you get out of it. Like for me, I used to be very into it. And then I remember, I think it was it was either in your TED talk or the question and answer you did. But you mentioned this guy, I think you called him Tim, who sprained both wrists and he kept on lifting. And I did that exact thing.
Oh,
Um,
right.
and
Not
and I
uncommon.
think that for me, it's taken finding joy in another physical outlet. For me, it's hiking, and I find back in the day, I wouldn't even go hiking because burning
Yeah,
they're not
takes away
useful
from
calories.
the progress. Yep.
Yeah, and do you think is that commonly something that you see in patients where they find some other joy in life or some other thing to um, not obsess over, but some other thing to draw meaning from?
Yeah. Yeah. Often, sometimes people's lives unexpectedly turn into a little cognitive behavioral therapy, and it plays out quite well. If you go to a psychologist and were to tell them things like this, they'd ideally set you up with some behavioral experiments to challenge what you think might happen. And you taking up hiking and doing that, you probably found that the impact it had on your progress was nowhere near as substantial as you might have thought at one time. Certainly not as substantial as the times where you could not fathom going on a hike and robbing yourself of those calories.
Hmm.
But you didn't necessarily know at the start. That's a perspective that comes after.
Hmm.
And that's literally all you are doing when someone says CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. And then sometimes it can be that you're forced to compromise. I have had a lot of guys with muscle dysmorphia, either past or recovering, be like, yeah, things changed for me once I had kids or I found a partner I really didn't want to lose, because those are forced compromises. And in the act of compromising, you often find more balance and you pull back from some of the more extreme behaviors. And you find that the progress you thought you were going to lose, you haven't really lost at all.
Hmm. And I
And
think there's
yeah,
like the even from just a so I used to be, and I still really love the idea of gaining muscle for health and things like that. I think it's super cool. But I think obviously now understanding this kind of stuff a little bit more, I think of more of a balance. And I think there's a lot of physiological reasons as to why what you're saying is kind of the case, because you can just pull back a little bit, and muscle memory is pretty good. Like it's pretty hard to lose muscle. You can
yeah.
maintain muscle pretty easily. Um, but I guess the thing that's worrying or concerning in the case of anabolic steroids is because, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. It's like once you get on that treadmill, it's like, let's say there's the natural bodybuilding treadmill. It's pretty, I find for most people, it's healthier. But there's not always, but a lot of the time, there seems to be some kind of internal narrative of feeling bad with yourself, or I'm currently not okay, therefore I must become okay. And I
Yeah.
think once you get on the doing anabolic steroids, it's like getting off the treadmill seems to have much higher resistance.
Well, and it makes total sense. It is a much different and more complicated exercise for us to run an effective treatment for someone who's also using anabolic steroids, and their path to being able to live life happily on their own terms tends to be longer. If we're talking about how the effects on you of pulling back on the dieting, the training, the flexibility of your schedule, how that doesn't translate through to big changes. Anabolic steroids are so effective at what they do that when you do come off them, if you choose to, then there are going to be big changes. I can't actually tell someone that those changes you won't notice, because they will.
Mm.
And if you're so invested in your muscles, in your workout, in progress, in aesthetics, if it's become so significant that you've made that decision to get on the steroids and you've experienced what it's like to build muscle that readily and that easily again, like when you first started training,
Mm.
that's very hard to walk back. And that's why we get, one third, sometimes floating up to nearly a half of our users who are dependent on the steroids, because you're asking a lot. You really are asking a lot of someone to come off at that point when they've been on for a while.
Mm. One thing that really comes to my mind with that, and I guess this would be, for me, this would totally be, this is a narrative that I haven't even thought about. Do you see people relapse like they would with other, like
Yeah,
methamphetamine or something?
all the time. All the time. It's part of that relapsing quality is part of how and why we frame it as a dependency.
Mm.
Because when you come off and you see those numbers going down, it is the tyranny of progress manifest. You've got to survive workout after workout where you're actually going backwards in all of these numbers that have come to mean so much. Could be weights, sets, reps, whatever, body weight. It's all going in the direction that you'd prefer it didn't. Um, and on top of that, the the your hormonal profile and how that translates through to your emotions is
Mm.
in massive flux. So without going into too much detail, and I imagine a lot of your readers or listeners would be aware, the reason why your testicles shrink when you're on steroids is because you're not making any testosterone naturally anymore. Most of their volumes for that. And for your body to restart testosterone production from 0 to near 0% to the amount that would be your baseline or natural is far greater than any of the substantial hormone shifts that would occur in a male or female body in its various stages. It's, I've likened it, crudely, inelegantly to guys going through their first and biggest period of their life and trying to handle that whilst also lacking the emotional equipment and clarity to generally handle life's distresses.
Mm.
And that's a very tough time for
Yeah.
these guys. Very, very tough.
Mm. Yeah. To the few people I have spoken to who have been on and then come off, sounds bloody hard. And that's why for me, I'm a big proponent of not try. I wouldn't say not using, but ideally not using. If you want to lift weights, I think there's a lot of beauty in the taking it from a natural approach as long as possible and trying to figure out how much meaning you can have in your lifting journey. Um, I don't know if you know Eric Helms. He's a researcher and runs a podcast called Iron Culture, and it's like the whole idea of that is the meaning behind lifting is. And for me, that's the thing, right? Because there's all these different disciplines you can get into, and there can be so much beauty in here. And now for me, it's expanded into other forms of exercise that don't have to do with contracting one joint and one range of motion. I still love lifting, but and it brings so much more meaning. And then that alleviates the previous small for me but present desire to take steroids. And
Yeah.
it's like I know for me it's not a good idea. And
Yeah.
I think for most people it's probably not, but it's not like we can just pretend they don't exist and pretend they're not attractive.
Yeah. We all find our own peace and clarity, make meaning of it in our own ways. It's hard in this space because we can often lack insight into just how, let's say, preoccupied or anxious or obsessive we're being about something. And because we live in a world, and certainly, a society where these kinds of behaviors are moralized in positive ways. You can get a lot of pats on the back for exercising, for dieting, certainly for looking particular ways. And if you don't, if anyone listening has had experience of being fat, or if you're a guy skinny, you can get punished quite severely. And certainly the context we grew up in as we're younger, say high school or in dating arenas.
Mm.
So trying to find meaning there can be hard because you can think it's working for you and you can package it up in terms like self-actualization. I just want to be the best version of myself, but it's not working for you. Unlike in a lot of psychological disorders like schizophrenia, anxiety, depression, no one wants those. no one ever walks in and when I'm having a chat about, do you want to get rid of the schizophrenia or not? They don't want it. But when it's the training, the exercise, the roids, it can be really hard to figure out what's truly wanted versus what's just, keeping me grinding from day to day so things don't fall apart. That's why talking to a professional is really handy.
Yeah, 100%. And I think something that you really illustrated there that I see probably every day is that swing from in high school, youth, wherever, I was told I don't look right. And then someone sees a massive change in their physique, and then they get massive positive reinforcement. And then I think it's that
Yeah.
wheel for many people, certainly for myself. And it's really interesting to have this.
Yeah. And it frustrates the hell out of me because, take anorexia, the predominant stigma there in our studies and others is that folks with anorexia, they are just narcissistic and vain and are trying to get attention. But then when I'm actually running treatment or in a feeding ward where someone's got a nasogastro tube up their nose, you have to deal with a very real reality that as often young women have gone from a BMI of 18 to 16 to 17, they get more male attention than they ever had. And they have to deal with trying to understand that and all the positive reinforcement that comes with it from how it actually makes them feel. And the number of dudes who have bulked up and then they feel like they've had more success on the apps or just with women or men generally, and how that translates through to an underlying belief about how the world works that is unshakable, is not doing them favors.
And do you think maybe this is something I've thought about before? Do you think we can do our small part in like the culture or however you want to phrase it? Do you think we can do our small part by not commenting on people's appearance and physique as much as possible, pretty much like saying basically I as a coach, so I coach lifters and primarily lifters, and then I have my health coach work, which is more general population, but I basically try to say very minimal. I don't say anything about their physique. I don't say, hey, looking jacked, looking shredded, this looks really good today, blah blah blah. Like I try not to say that. Do you think that's a good approach, or what do you think is the correct approach there?
I think it's helpful. And I don't come at it from a moral perspective, like it is morally wrong to comment on someone's appearance. I come at it from a sense of where are the focuses placed? Like the world is already focusing on your appearance and your client's appearance is enough. There's no one is under any presumption that's not the case. So you can be an effective counterweight by not contributing to that. That's how I see you being helpful in not commenting on appearance.
Yeah. And I think I can't see whether it's the potential small risk of giving someone that validation based on changes they've made to their physique, and rather than saying, like, for me it's been shifting to, wow, you seem really happy, like you seem like you're really enjoying things, and shifting towards more that, wow, you seem like you're really enjoying the process. Like those kinds of things for me seem to be making a lot of sense.
Yeah. And that's how people don't get trapped in that means to an end. I think all the ends become the means. Like it should, as any hobby should be, have as much joy in it as possible. And it ought not to just be a grind day in, day out. You can forget that for many things, I think.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense for a lot of things in life. One thing that I was wondering is, for you, with the research, what do you think we're currently missing? So this is somewhat a selfish question, but where do you think potential researchers should go to, or where should they focus? And what do you think, say if someone wasn't there's a lot of masters and honors students listening to this. Yeah. What areas can they potentially focus on that might make a difference to this kind of topic? And what routes would you recommend they go?
Um, I, I got a lot of thoughts on where people could focus or how things could get better. I think one that would be most useful at the present point in time would be trying to give people as much guidance as possible about what a healthy investment in your physical appearance looks like. Because there are, let's say, two camps. There's the appearance enhancement industry, these are organizations that benefit financially from you worrying about your appearance. They're not going to say that. They're going to package it in different ways that are more palatable and don't attract scrutiny, but that's where they benefit, right? The more you spend on TikTok looking at people who look certain ways, consuming certain substances, whatever, the better it is for them. Then the other camp are activists who are have a very, I'm going to say, progressive view of how the world ought to be, and I don't disagree with them. It's where comments or beliefs like appearance ought not to matter, etc., come from, and I can get on board that. But meeting people in the middle is what's important because right now we're all living in the world with the problems I've just described.
Yeah.
And I can't look a 18-year-old skinny kid or overweight young woman and tell her that, just march out there and be confident and say, appearance doesn't matter and you'll be fine. Because it won't. We don't live in that world. So having people be better able for themselves to identify what a healthy investment in appearance looks like for me so that I can navigate the world I'm in and feel good without succumbing to some of these traps that cause misery. That is what would be most useful to a lot of people, I think.
Yeah. And I think that concept really applies to, because we talked a lot about muscle dysmorphia, but I think it really applies to a lot of like all ends of the spectrum of body shapes and sizes. It's something where unfortunately it's the reality that there will be stigma and things like that. But I think there's some level of healthy investment for each individual. And would you say that's for each individual to figure out? But I guess
that is exactly the case. When I run stuff with guys with muscle dysmorphia, anorexia, people who are addicted to cosmetic surgery, it doesn't matter in this space. For some people, going from having muscle dysmorphia to not can mean very little change in the way of what their routine looks like and how they diet. It's just a few changes to beliefs and some flexibility. For others, they might not be able to count calories ever again because every time they do, within a week or two, they find themselves calculating the calorie count of everything down to one decimal place. And it just puts them in a mindset where they can't stop stressing about what's going into their body. And look, for them, they might just have to not do it. They might just have to not do it. But that's going to be so different for everyone, that line. And I think part of maturing in general and being emotionally intelligent and investing in that part of yourself, right? Not just your physical formidability, is learning where those lines are for you, that keep things joyous and positive for you.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. And I think, it must be a really interesting process to see the fact that the individual has to figure this out, but when there's pathology involved, it's like, I don't know, maybe the analogy could be like, it's like an external entity that shifts it's like you're looking through a lens and it shifts the lens a few degrees and then they see it here, but in reality, some version of themselves thinks it should be here, which is the true middle point or whatever.
Yeah. And the entertaining those changes can be really scary. Like not uncommon in a first meeting with guys with muscle dysmorphia to hear something like, I'm happy to talk, but I'm not going to stop using roids. Or I'm not going to stop being in the gym. I'm not going to stop doing X, Y, Z, because that change feels so insurmountable and unapproachable.
Yeah.
Which can be funny sometimes because I can talk to these guys and be like, do you think you, say, guy in your late 20s, do you reckon you're in any way, shape, or form like how you were in your early 20s? And they'll go, oh, absolutely not. I'm totally different. I've changed heaps. And I'll be like, well, what we're proposing is this. The tiny space between my fingers like that. And what you've already done is huge. So you can do it. You're always changing. You can always make these changes.
And I think that's something that really, for a lot of coaches, so I talk to a lot of online personal trainers and people like that. And I think a lot of people struggle with, in this space, I think there's a lot of scarcity mindset within online personal training, but also they don't want to push people too hard to change certain things that even the coach knows in their heart is not right for that person. And, we don't want to prescribe our beliefs to that person. But yeah, I think people can often get quite scared of, someone walks in and says, oh yeah, I do steroids, but I don't want to quit. I think it's really, it must be a really hard position for you because, how do you keep them engaged? And then, yeah, like that's the thing that I'm still learning in my health coaching practice, but with less risky issues is how to, like, let's say I want to help someone lower their cholesterol. How do I convince them to keep coming to the sessions, keep investing and keep trying different things without saying, like, say it's a bloke who loves his beers and he'll be like, nah, I'm not going to stop drinking, or I'm not going to stop XYZ. And it's real hard. It's real hard not to scare people off.
It's when you're doing straight, physiological, biological medicine, it's pretty easy because you're not dealing with people's motivations or feelings or beliefs. But a couple of physiotherapists tell me now that they don't envy the roles of personal trainers, because if you're just sorting out someone's bung knee, you're really just working on the biomechanics of that knee and maybe cajoling them for not doing as many the rehab exercises they should have. But let's say you're a personal trainer, and I can come at it from the perspective of psych, but also someone who likes to be in the gym, trains, diets, etc. You're dealing with so much there. You've got the underlying beliefs of why they're seeking you out in the first place, which can be packaged in with all kinds of stuff, their individual motivations and life circumstances, the biomechanics of what they can and can't do, and also the feelings that come with you trying to do calorie restriction and now you're hungry. If you've experienced trying to maintain, sanity, keeping to calorie restrictions, that's its own beast, just its own one thing. And that's a lot to try and do in a manner which is also healthy, because the entire industry comes under criticism for promoting unhealthy practices. It's not easy to do. I don't think it's very easy to do online at arm's length either. So yeah, I have a lot of empathy for people in those roles.
Yeah. And I think, I don't know if you're familiar with Caitlin Barnes, but she's a really great researcher who's doing some super cool research on this about nutritional competency and personal trainers and things like that. And it's really cool stuff. I think the industry is changing rapidly towards a place where we understand this more. I think there's a lot more conversations going on about this stuff where we're getting away from the only thing I offer as a personal trainer is physique changes and nothing else. And it's like, I think there's slowly a growing movement of, like you offer a lot more than that. And it's about the lifestyle more than the result in terms of the hard physique changes. Like that's one of the things that could come about, but it doesn't even have to be a part of it whatsoever.
And a really thoughtful personal trainer who's, listening to podcasts like yours is generally going to be doing their clients a great service, because the kinds of things that they're saying to them can be counterweights to their own critical inner voice, which might otherwise, if left unchecked, take them to places that, are darker and frankly much less enjoyable in the long run for them. So you get to be that useful counter person.
Yeah. And as a coach, I've been coaching for 3.5 years, and it's taken me so long to get to a place where I can actually have some impact there. And it's been a deliberate effort. And it's really, I'm really, really glad to hear you say that, because it does, a lot of PTs are really trying, but we do get a decent amount of slack sometimes. But I do
Yeah.
think there's still a lot of growth to happen in the industry, but I think it's happening rather quickly at the moment, at the very least. Which I
Yeah.
think is super
And
cool.
it's not surprising that there's a lot of you know, you guys not getting as much slack in there because you're kind of caught again where people are, which is, you know, being ostensibly part of an industry which benefits financially from people worrying about their appearance.
Hmm.
But we're also so far off from appearance not being important, and
Yeah,
it may never not be important, that it has to be grappled with anyway.
yeah,
Injecting it with morality only makes it more challenging for everyone to navigate, I
hmm.
think.
Yeah, 100%. I really think it's something that I think we'll continue to work on as an industry. And I think, yeah, I'm way more optimistic than I was 2 years ago. Um,
Good. I'm glad.
anyway, yeah, and I'm really, really glad to have this conversation. I really, really enjoyed it. Um, if people did want to find you online, I'll link your TED talk and things like that in the show notes if people want to have a look. But where can people find you online? I don't know if you're on social media too much or things like that.
I'm on Twitter if people want to follow. So it's at Scott1Griffiths. We talk about our research a lot. We've got papers coming out in coming months, which I think will be really helpful. They are interviews we've done with tens and tens of guys with muscle dysmorphia, and we have the entirety of the interviews de-identified for people to listen to and to read. And it gives you a good sense of, okay, this is what someone with clinically diagnosed muscle dysmorphia sounds like.
Mm.
Because it's one thing to hear me tell it to you, but it's another to listen, to read for 45 minutes someone answering the kinds of questions that you might ask if you were trying to figure out if there was a problem going on. So yeah, that's something to look forward to for anyone who wants another Twitter person to follow.
I'm definitely looking forward to that.